Well, hello, everybody. This is the progress report, and because this is the first Wednesday in December, as has been the case for quite a while, I am joined by my great good friend and distinguished public servant, the Honorable Lou D'Alessandro, the Dean of the Senate. And he's here, and we're glad to see him back. He's been away needing to have some medical issues that resolved, which is he's underway, and he was certainly in Concord today.
Right.
And we are very excited to have also by Skype, which we haven't had to do in a while, but we want to talk about what happened today in Concord. Today was the first day of the meeting of the new legislature that we all elected. Hope we all voted. A lot of us did in November. And this is what they call Organization Day, and it's a very important day in the start of the legislative two-year terms for our state reps and our state senators, including re-elected Lou D'Alessandro. And a lot of important issues get decided today, and it's a day when interesting things can happen. And in any event, we're very excited to have Lou with us.
We'll get Kevin.
There he is, Kevin.
Looking good, Kevin.
Can we hear him?
How you doing, guys?
There he is. I don't know why that thing's still ringing.
No, that's that one. It's mine, I think. I'll let
Yeah,
it
okay.
We'll let it go.
All right. Any event, I hope we can get that off. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I know you've had a big and a long day, and it's wonderful to have you back with us. It's been a while. And there is nobody, folks, that knows New Hampshire's political history, going back quite a few years, better than Kevin Landrigan. And some things happened up in Concord today that deserve his insight and historical perspective. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're back to the issue of how the state's going to be governed for the next 2 years. And we may get into some other issues like what is really the threat to the New Hampshire primary. That's certainly a big issue, and we have no more capable people to discuss that issue, and whether the threat posed by the new proposals from President Biden and many others to not have New Hampshire go first, how serious a threat is all that really. So that's what we're up to today, Lou, and thank you for being here. And it's
my pleasure.
Making it was kind of a miracle, I think. But
it was.
You did it. I did. I was really surprised and pleased that you were here to get our show underway.
Right.
So let's launch right in. Organization Day is the day when everybody meets, and everybody that was elected that can get there gets sworn in, both in the Senate and the House.
Right.
So the newly elected representatives are not representatives-elect. They are now representatives, and same with the 24 state senators. And they had very important issues to deal with today. So, Lou, how was it up there, and how was the attendance?
Well, on the Senate side, obviously the attendance is perfect. Everybody shows up. We had 24 people there, and that's usually the situation. Now, in the House, Kevin, I believe there were a number of people who were not there.
That's right. There were 391 members present of the 400 in the House, which, as you know, Lou and Bob, I mean, that's a tremendous turnout.
Yes.
Even on Organization Day, you always have legislators who have a conflict this particular week and may not be able to be here, whether they planned a trip or a family gathering or something happens.
Right.
And invariably, a number of them don't show up, and they end up taking the oath of office in January when the legislature actually begins.
Yeah.
But because of the historic nature of what's happening in the House, I mean, right now a 3-vote spread, the tightest majority either party has had in New Hampshire history.
Yes.
Attendance meant everything
Yes,
today.
it did.
And so when you had the race for Speaker of the House, who's going to be the Speaker of the House? When all Republicans have to be on deck, and it turned out even 2 of them were absent as well as 5 House Democrats who couldn't make it today. So because of that, in other words, because of the better turnout by Republicans and the 3-vote edge they had, there was no doubt that Sherman Packard was going to get reelected as Speaker.
And he did, obviously.
Yes, he did.
There was an interesting thing that Lou alerted me to. There was a third person who thought he'd announced to be a candidate for Speaker, not a current member, as I understand it, but a former member. I take it nothing came of that. Nobody went to vote for him or put his name in nomination, or did they?
That's right. Nobody did put his name in nomination, and there was a lot of discussion, even before the general election, about perhaps a challenge within the caucus of this Speaker Sherm Packard, who, as Lou knows, wasn't elected Speaker the ordinary way.
Right.
I mean, the Speaker passed away within days after being inaugurated 2 years ago. Dick Hintz from Merrimack.
Merrimack, yes.
And Sherm Packard kind of has his number two in command stepped into the breach and became Speaker for that full 2-year term. So there certainly were people in the ultra-conservative wing of the House Republican caucus who considered mounting a challenge against Sherm Packard. But at the end of the day, once the November midterms occurred and the majority was so tenuous and so small, it made it almost untenable for somebody to challenge the sitting speaker in that inevitability.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? In other words, it only would have taken a few votes, but consider the options, right? If somebody from way out in the right wing decides, I'm going to challenge Sherm Packard, and he gets 5 votes, then Matt Wilhelm, the House Democratic leader, becomes Speaker of the House.
Right.
So in many respects, the very tight majority that Sherm Packard had actually prevented him from facing any challenge whatsoever.
It served to his benefit. Really.
Yeah.
No, it really did. And we have seen this in the past, where when the majority in the House is not significant, then all members have to row the boat together to get anything done. And really what's going to be fascinating to see in the next 2 years is how Speaker Packard is going to be able to keep this very tiny majority together.
Yeah.
And I think he's already considering ways in which he can empower House Democrats to help him manage the next 2 years, because it's going to be very difficult.
And I imagine in the committees with this very narrow margin, and who knows, there's already a tie race that, we don't have a representative seated from that part of Rochester, and we're going to talk about that. But, it could change. It could change and go down, and inevitably there's going to be special elections coming up with a 400-member Bobby. There are always people that are going to move, or, they're ill and they can't serve. And you got to let it right, and then you got to have a special election. And so, this thing is very tenuous. And who knows if this majority of the Republicans now hold of 3 votes, 4 votes, if it's going to last.
Yeah. Now, Kevin, I've heard that negotiations were started that talked about a 50-50 representation on all committees. Now
I think I think the Speaker's giving serious consideration to that, and it only makes sense to do so.
Makes a great deal of sense.
I think there may be a few committees where that is not the case. House Finance would be the one that comes instantly to mind. Creating the state budget is the most important work of the next legislature for the next 2 years. I'd be shocked if this Speaker decided, okay, we're going to make it 50-50 on that committee. But he may well make it 12-11, And the other issue we're hearing about is, and this is what I was talking about, a shared leadership role.
Yes.
Is considering naming Democrats from the House to vice chairman of a number of committees.
I heard that.
So you not only might have equal membership on many of these committees, but you'd also have someone in the minority actually helping lead the process along. Keep in mind now, with this very tight majority that I'm talking about, this Speaker, Majority Leader Jason Osborne, very conservative, doctrinaire guy, they both understand the next 2 years the House is going to have a limited agenda. In other words, there's a lot of things ideologically, philosophically, House Republicans want to happen that isn't going to happen.
Right.
So in many ways, this Speaker, Sherm Packard, has to figure out a way to have Democrats help him essentially sideline a lot of very conservative and very liberal legislation.
Right.
So it doesn't detract from the ability of the House to do its business.
I think those are very good points, and I think he's got to walk a very, very careful line. Composition of the committees will be very important. Composition of the Finance Committee, very important. And who will chair the Finance Committee.
Sure.
That, to me,
no question.
Very, very.
As is the case in in the state Senate, as Lou well
Yes.
knows. I mean, it's 14-10. Republicans are still in charge, and there's nobody. There's no Senate Republican who has served on the Finance Committee.
That's correct. None.
Right? So
Right.
Jeb Bradley, the new Senate president, has to essentially construct a whole leadership structure
Yes.
about who's going to direct that budget on the Republican side. And obviously, you're going to lead the effort on the Democratic side. There's no doubt about that. But so even in the Senate Republicans as well, with 8 new members
Yes.
in both parties,
Right.
have a lot of changes they have to execute.
Right. And no Republican has served on Ways and Means.
Right.
Because that,
Right.
that could.
And in the House Ways and Means Committee, let's look at that
sure,
for example.
well,
The chairman, Patrick Obama, got defeated.
Right.
In November. The longtime, I should say, he's the vice chairman and was going to be the chairman.
Yes.
The longtime chairman, Norm Major,
Right.
after more than 40 years in the legislature, retired.
I chose not to run.
So Sherman Packard on that committee has to basically start from scratch
Yep.
and find not only new leadership but new members.
Yes.
And the other thing that's going to be interesting to see in committee structure for him is you've got a lot of conservative Republicans in that caucus, okay? And you have to figure out a way to keep them happy. And one way to do that is to sprinkle them on some of these important committees. In other words, not give them leadership roles, but rather give them a seat or two on finance, a seat or two on Ways and Means. In other words, you bring them under the tent instead of having them shoot
the
from outside
right.
the tent, right?
Sure.
And you make them become partners in consensus building instead of rabble-rousers on the floor of the House.
Sure.
Well, it's going to be real interesting to see if that works because, as you said, there are some real flamethrowers over there on the extreme right, the Freedom Caucus, and the extreme libertarians and all of that.
By the way,
and are they going to be happy
Matt,
with this, or are they going to be unhappy because the House will have a hard time getting anything done on their agenda?
No, it's true. And incidentally, at the same time, I'll point out House Democratic Leader Matt Wilhelm has his work cut out for him too, and here's why. This House Democratic caucus that he leads now, which is very close to an actual majority, has a lot of very liberal members in it.
Yes.
Okay? And most of these folks had everything to do with Matt Wilhelm becoming House Democratic leader and not former House Speaker Steve Schertl.
Right.
Okay? So they're going to expect a place at the table, and they're going to expect some of their issues to be addressed by him, whether they're achievable or not in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So he's going to have some negotiating to do as well with his caucus, which is very different than the one of the last 2 years.
Do you know with what plan the House Democrats, being so close to actually having the majority, came in? I mean, do you have any insight into where their caucus is? Was there? I guess I'm really asking: is there an atmosphere right now? I mean, it's early, but right now, of civility and comedy and a willingness to try and work with the new leader, the re-elected speaker and the leadership.
Yeah, I think. For this new House Democratic leader, Matt Wilhelm, I think his approach essentially is going to be trust but verify. Right? In other words,
I remember that phrase.
Right.
Accept House Speaker Packard's olive branch to the Democrats. We're going to work together. You're going to be part of the process. You're going to help manage the session for the next 2 years. But every week he's going to make sure that the rights of the majority are not just respected, but they're enhanced,
right.
and they're part of the process, which is so important. I mean, this is such an easier game to achieve in the state Senate, as Lou knows, where both parties historically have always tried to work together, even when the numbers are lopsided.
Right.
You know, every senator has a voice and has a role in that chamber and can get things done.
Yes.
And in the House, it's a very different animal. When you have these lopsided majorities, it gets even more partisan, even more vitriolic. But when they're smaller, they have to work together.
Yeah.
And and developing a state budget on the House side, that's going to be real challenging.
I think
there
so.
isn't any question, because here's one thing to consider that I know is going to keep House Speaker Packard up at night for the next month or two, which is a number of conservative Republicans in the House. Their attitude essentially is, we don't need a budget next year, because if we don't pass a budget next year, as Lou knows, and we operate under a continuing resolution, then we're going to operate under lower spending levels than we otherwise would if we pass a new budget.
That's a very good point.
So this is just one example where Packard's going to have to figure out a way is, how do I broker with the Democrats and get enough of them to support enough of what I want?
Oh, that's so interesting.
Budget.
Yeah.
You know, so because that's where we saw that happen to Sean Jasper. You remember this well, Lou?
Yes.
Well, Lou, when Sean Jasper was Speaker of the House, he couldn't pass a budget.
Right.
The state Senate had to start the process over
Yes.
there, and it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And the House essentially ended up being completely dealt out of the process, right? And frankly, had a lot to do with Sean Jasper deciding, you know what, I want to be Commissioner of Agriculture, not Speaker of the House anymore.
Well, it pays better.
You know?
You know, and I remember well before that, but you'll remember this too, Kevin, I'm sure, a guy named Doug Scammon from Stratford.
Sure.
I can't remember the exact circumstances by which he came to be the Speaker, but he did reach out to the Democrats and had a very constructive relationship with them, as I even remember the Democrats recalling, and happily recalling, that he behaved as a very bipartisan leader in many, many important issues. We'll see if that can happen again.
Well, there was even talk it was backdoor talk about getting somebody like Doug Scammon to come back, because you don't have to be a member to be the Speaker.
Yeah.
That's
You
right.
know, so there was talk about that, particularly when it was going to be 200 to 200.
Yeah.
Right. And
Had that kind of chatter.
And that's and as you know, Lou, I mean, this show isn't over.
No.
I mean, every 2 years, at least a half dozen special elections occur in the House.
Yep.
Yes.
Because people pass away, they resign,
Yep.
they leave the district, and under the statute in the House, for sure, once you leave your district and no longer a resident, you can't serve there.
That's right.
So, and we have today House Democratic Leader Wilhelm calling for the resignation of an elected Democrat
Yes,
who didn't take the oath today.
Very interesting that he did that.
Yes.
She's in jail on stalking charges.
Yep.
So that could be an open seat in Nashville with a special election next year, as well as the one that's going to happen in
In
Rochester.
Rochester, that's true. And they swore in an elected representative today, but he wasn't sworn in time to vote. So he's now part of the process. The clerk mentioned that at the end of the count. He said that
He did. And Travis O'Hara, his name is Travis O'Hara of Belmont, a Republican, and he won the seat and was supported by Governor Sununu, who was running against, if you'll recall, the very small minority of conservative Republicans who supported seceding from the country.
Yeah.
Okay? And so there were a lot of people in the Packard leadership not happy that Representative O'Hara was not there, since he's replacing somebody who obviously was very conservative Republican, who was going to be a vote for Packard, you know. And so I can imagine this guy's phone was burning up. So sure enough, he makes it to the State House, but he doesn't get there in time.
right.
He has to take the oath of office and then afterwards be welcomed into the House after the speakership race is over.
Right.
Now, you know, I'm dying to see the seating assignment Representative Travis O'Hara ends up with as a result of all this,
Right.
but or the committee assignment, because you never know. But they weren't too pleased with that one.
Well, it was an interesting day, no question.
It was
no
certainly,
question,
it certainly looked like it was
it was.
inevitably going to be. Has a situation ever occurred, Kevin? I think you've already kind of hinted at the answer to this, where because of a closely knit House as we have today, and then as a result of a series of special elections, say there's 3 special elections and the Democrats win them all, and well, of course they have to be in a district that's now held by a Republican, obviously, to make a difference. But has it ever happened that the majority is flipped during the term of a legislature?
Not that I can recall,
I don't think so.
And I think, but this certainly could
could
test
happen,
that principle.
yeah.
I mean, the other thing that that this speaker has to acknowledge and be aware of is that if he becomes too autocratic because he's having difficulty managing the House, as former Representative Backus will be well aware of, at any point, any member of the House may challenge the chair
Yes.
Yep.
on any ruling that the chair,
Yeah.
that the speaker makes on any topic
Yeah.
whatsoever. So, and that's the power the minority leader now, Matt Wilhelm, now has.
Yeah.
That if you abuse the majority that you have, we'll come with knives out.
Yeah.
And on a day when our numbers may be greater than your numbers, after a 4-hour session, we'll start challenging the chair on everything.
Yeah.
And bring the place to a complete halt. And once a speaker were to lose those kind of challenges,
Yeah.
as you know, Bob, then all of a sudden you're a speaker without the
Yeah.
crown.
And those challenges can succeed on a simple majority vote, can they not?
That's correct.
That doesn't
That's
take a
correct.
2/3 vote like
No.
reconsideration
No, it
or
does
whatever,
It does not.
Wow.
Well, I think the speaker's got his hands full. I don't think there's any question
He does.
about
But
that.
you've known him for a long
Yes.
time, Lou, and you know as well, before he became Speaker, for almost 20 years, Chairman of the House Transportation Committee, he was legendary for producing these 20-0 votes on that committee. Now, I grant you, House Transportation isn't raising your taxes, isn't passing the budget,
Right.
but they have an assortment of issues that are actually often about motor vehicle fines and violations and things and inspections and registrations can be really controversial, but he always managed to get both parties to work together.
Right.
And many people have wondered since November whether we'll see a different style of leadership from Sherman Packard and a return to that style he had when he was that long-term committee chairman, who was really popular among Democrats on his committee as somebody who always had an open door for us, who always gave us an opportunity to make our case in committee and get our bill passed, even if the majority didn't like it. That's what will be interesting to see. He's kept, as you know, Jason Osborne as his majority leader,
Yes.
who was a very hardliner over the past 2 years, but Osborne himself has basically said, I can count too.
That's right.
We can only get a limited amount of things done over the next 2 years. We're going to have to work together with the Democrats, and I'm committed to doing that.
Yeah. I think the realization is there that only a limited number of things can pass, given the situation as it exists now. And I think tops on that priority list is Medicaid expansion. We have got to have Medicaid expansion. That's got to get done. That's a multi-billion-dollar deal, and New Hampshire has really benefited from that. So that has got to get done.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, as you know.
Absolutely.
We've got to, because we've got a Health and Human Service Commissioner Lori Shibonette in a couple of weeks who's retiring.
Sure.
Right. And there's going to be an acting commissioner, Lori Weaver, who's the deputy number 2 in charge. Very competent. Don't get me wrong, but that whole process of not only continuing Medicaid expansion, but improving it and perhaps changing the model in which it is delivered. This governor would like to do that. He's serious about taking a look at maybe we go from a managed care model to a different one that delivers services more efficiently, that has less administrative overhead, and as a result could actually better serve customers.
Well, I think that's a big deal. Negotiations have already begun, I'm sure. So that conversation's taking place. And with Lori Weaver in place, remember she's only there for a year. Filling the unexpired term of Shibonette. So she's in a very difficult situation, if indeed she wants to get appointed to a full term.
And the search goes on for her replacement.
The search is still on.
The governor has said, I've already looked at, I have a search committee. They produce some really qualified people. So Lori may not serve out this full unexpired term, and this governor may be bringing someone else in. The whole issue is a fascinating one, and here's why. Because at the end of the day, this governor also needs to trim back his wish list, as he looks at this legislature, and has to decide which fights he wants to pick and which ones he wants to leave aside. And and this, for example, this commissioner position may be one he decides, you know what, Lori's competent. She's well liked in the agency. She has a lot of friends in the rank and file. She can do the job. Maybe I should keep her there through the legislative session and through the budget.
Yes.
And then after that, perhaps bring in a reformer, somebody out from the outside, a change agent, because I think that's who Chris Sununu ultimately wants in that job, is somebody who's willing to try different things, take risks, and doesn't come from the bureaucratic infrastructure.
Right. I think that's a good point. And Shibboleth came from the inside, and COVID, she did really a great job with COVID, her and Dr. Chen, but she was washed out. She was ready to go.
Yeah, well, it's a burnout job,
no
as you
question,
know. I mean, you're running half.
Boy, I wouldn't want
running
that job.
almost
I'll
half
tell
the
you
state
that. That's
government
one tough job.
with 3,000 employees, and as you alluded to COVID, I mean, that really took a lot out of her.
Oh, sure.
I mean, that whole because in many ways it's sort of, that's what people forget about the job that Lori Shibboleth had during COVID. I mean, Chris Sununu gets to be the face of the state and execute the state's approach to how we're dealing with this deadly pandemic.
Right.
She had to implement all of it.
Right.
On a day-to-day basis, right? Across all of these departments, all these different agencies. You didn't have just HHS involved in fighting COVID,
Nope.
right? You had
Everybody.
emergency management, you had safety, you had public health, you had,
all of them.
You had part-time, you had state workers dispatched from their existing agencies for months into agencies helping with the COVID response. I mean, it was an enormous undertaking.
And she had to be on television every afternoon at 3:00 explaining what was going on with the governor and with Dr. Chen. They became TV stars. And they did that day after day after day. Now, tell me that isn't wearing, to have to be prepared, be there, and be able to answer the questions and come up with solutions all the time. People weren't looking for empty answers; they were looking for direct answers, and she had to come up with them. And so the COVID put a lot of pressure on those people, and I think her decision to leave was certainly governed by that activity. In my opinion, had to be.
So another interesting thing that happened today is the House did, as the Constitution says it must do, it decided how to handle the disputed election, and it ended in a tie in Rochester between the former mayor of the town and the recently serving Representative Grassi. And my understanding is that the result was there's going to be a special election in Rochester.
Yes.
And it was very interesting. I thought with the Democrats having such a narrow majority that they might try and whip their people to say, let's just seat the guy who's the Republican. Well, it didn't happen, and I guess it really wasn't a big surprise it didn't happen. But were you at all surprised about the outcome of that they didn't go to a coin toss or?
Yeah, what happened to the coin toss? We used to have the coin toss, remember?
Right, yeah.
That's gone.
It did. I mean, but as you know, Lou, Secretary of State Bill Gardner created the coin toss and the little ball for settling ties in primaries because the statute was silent about what do you do. So he came up with this. In a general election, the Constitution is clear. The members seat themselves. Right. The members may only judge themselves. So to have a coin flip, you'd actually have to pass a resolution saying this election is going to be adopted by a coin flip. Now, Chuck Grassi didn't want to go along with that. I mean, I think David Walker, the Republican, might have, but Chuck Grassi, 8-term Democrat, very popular in that district, said this should go back to the voters. And there's precedent for it because it's been done before, and he's right. And since 2014, the then House clerk put out a memo which basically said the history of the state in settling these tie elections has essentially been not to invoke this constitutional superpower. Here's what happened today. They elected Secretary of State David Scanlon, as we'll talk about in a bit.
Yes.
Once they did, about 10 Republicans left the chamber. So So when Matt Wilhelm brought in the resolution for the special election, House Republicans tried to table it.
Yes.
And until January, we don't have to do this right now. And they had the roll call vote, and it was 193 to 187 against tabling it. And the reason was 10 Republicans had left, and 3 Republicans had joined the Democrats supporting a special election. This is why the House leadership position had been, let's put it off, because they knew there were a few people who were already with the Democrats. So they had to have perfect attendance in order to block the special election. And once Scanlon won, a bunch of folks just left. I mean, Osborne got up and essentially said, sorry for the confusion. There are little kinks here.
Right.
So we're going to move to have a special election approved. And the kinks were what we just talked about, is every vote, every warm body counts.
Right. Exactly.
You have to keep count.
Exactly.
Of every warm body in the seats before you call any vote.
Yep.
And this was a hard lesson to the Packers leadership today, that you had the votes when it counted to elect the speaker, but you lost a few at the end of the day because they thought it didn't matter. The problem Packard's House Republican leadership had was there were a few Republicans who wanted there were a few Republicans who wanted to have the special election. There were also a few who wanted the coin flip. And the few some of them wanted the coin flip essentially were conservative Republicans who were basically saying, what are we spending $20,000 on a special election for?
Right.
When people, of the taxpayers' money, when they can't even afford to heat their homes this winter.
Right.
So he could not create a working, solid majority behind essentially using the power and seating the Republican. And I think the leadership in his own party basically also felt, at the end of the day, as Lou well knows, the demographics of Rochester, it's an urban city. It's not a big D Democratic city.
No.
And David Walker's the former mayor of Rochester. Mm-hmm. Chuck Grassley's very popular. The point being, if the Republicans get out and hustle, raise money, and really do the work, they can compete in a special election.
Mm-hmm.
I'd give Grassley, I'd make him the early favorite, but they can win that special election. It's not out of the question. Mm-hmm. So let's have it happen.
Yeah.
So, and the two things that have to happen, this is, as when things like this happen, we have to always remember to cross the T's and dot the I's. The Rochester City Council has to approve holding a special election, right? Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a debate there.
Yeah,
perhaps.
sure there is.
And P.S. David Walker is on the Rochester City Council. Okay? So, and then the Executive Council, run by majority Republicans, have to schedule that special election.
Right.
So there's going to be that whole debate about when it's held. Is it going to be held during school vacation, for example? You know what I mean?
Yep.
To help drive out turnout. Or is it going to be held at a more remote date in the winter to keep turnout low?
Yeah.
Right. It's right.
This is why we love to have you with us, Kevin. I thought this was just pretty simple. We have a special election; it's done. It turns out there's a good many more.
Good. There are many
facets to this beyond just.
Right.
We're going to do a special election. That's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
But this was a good victory for Matt Wilhelm on his first day of Democratic leader, because it signals to him, you know what? If we stay united and we all show up,
right.
We can make things happen.
Yeah.
Especially when Republicans try and push their weight around.
Yeah.
As they clearly tried to do today.
That's going to be really interesting. It surely is.
Well, it's a numbers game. It always has been a numbers game, and you got to keep people there. People have to show up. And as we both know, Kevin, and as you know, Bob, as the session progresses, the numbers begin to dwindle.
They do, and in both parties, as both you guys know well, in every session, it takes about a month for the leadership in both parties to know which members are habitual no-shows. In other words,
Yeah.
they not only don't go to
Right.
sessions, they don't show up at committee work either.
Yep.
You know, and they're not large numbers here, but look at the math.
Yeah, look at the math.
You know, do the numbers.
Every
All you
member
need
is very
on
important.
either side, right, is a half dozen Republicans or Democrats who basically aren't willing to do the work and show up all the time.
Yeah.
So, and then either majority or minority is wounded
Yeah.
by the turnout. You know,
Right.
so they're going to have to keep a real close eye on their own members,
Oh, I think so.
and also try as much as possible to accommodate them. You know, Matt Wilhelm made the pitch today. I don't think it's going to be successful, but I think it's smart for him to make it, which is we have a couple of people ill from COVID today. We should be able to allow members of the House to vote by proxy if they're not able to be there in person on a session day. And his message essentially to Sherm Packard is, I know philosophically you're against this. I get it. You're a traditionalist. You think there should be butts in the seats in order to vote, period. But with your own very narrow majority, there are going to be days when some of your members can't be here, whether it's important business, illness, family concerns, whatever.
Of course, that was a huge issue.
And so, in other words, on your side, the use of proxies could be to your benefit as well.
Yeah.
So,
Think about
Well, that's
it.
a very interesting point he's making there, isn't it? We certainly
It
had that
is.
issue in the last legislature when
Right.
Rennie Cushing and others wanted to,
Right.
and they went to court, and it was eventually a court decision that surprised a lot of people that the court would not take jurisdiction of this because it was within the purview of the chambers to decide how to deal with these kind of issues. So we've had a lot of background on this.
And that controversy, by the way, is still in U.S. District Court.
Is it really?
That lawsuit, yeah. It was kicked back by the Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston, and it's still back in Concord on the merits of the issue philosophically. And the philosophical issue basically being, does the American Disabilities Act require
Yes, that's it.
that the legislature not have rules that essentially say if you're disabled and you can't make it, you shouldn't be able to participate.
Yeah.
And so that's still being argued.
I did not know that. That's interesting. Well, I wonder when we're going to get a definitive decision on that case. I didn't know it was still out there, so it's really interesting. Before we go on with the other issues we want to get to, Kevin, and you know what's coming up, I'm sure, the Secretary of State in the New Hampshire primary, I just want to remind our viewers out there that this is the progress report, and you can call in. Now, last week, we had people who were trying to call in. We couldn't take their calls. I understand that even in this high-tech marathon miracle place we're in, it was simply because a phone jack wasn't plugged in. So I assume that that's okay. And if you want to call in and join our show, the number's on the screen. We're always willing to welcome callers to the show. So if that's something you're inclined to do, please try it. Even if you may tried last week and it was frustrating because you couldn't get through, we should be able to handle that this week. And then I just once again remind you that thanks to Mike and his daughter, especially his daughter, this show is going to be available not only in the usual repeats, but on YouTube, usually up within 24 hours. So, and by God, we have an incoming call. Let's talk to our caller.
Whoa.
Whoops. Well, we had a caller. Gone.
Good.
Caller, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I thought I was getting that receive button quickly, but if you want to call back, we'll certainly pick you up. But with that, time is roaring on here, and we got so much great substance coming in this show about what we can face in the 2-year term that's now underway with the members sworn in the House and Senate this very day. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, and Kevin, you wrote about it was in the paper this morning, I know, Melanie Levesque challenging Dave Scanlon, who succeeded the legendary Bill Gardner after all his years.
46 years.
46 years. My
46 years.
Goodness.
I gave the chronology of secretaries of state. I talked about the Secretary of State when I came to the House in 1972 to where it is now. Bob Stark, Ed Kelly, Bill Gardner.
That's
that was
it.
it. That
Yep.
was it.
Yeah.
That was it. Now,
Yeah, I mean, in the last 100 years, there've only been 9 secretaries of state in
Amazing,
Hampshire.
amazing.
Not only Bill Gardner, in other words, not only Bill Gardner has served there long. Historically, a lot of these guys
Yeah.
were there for decades.
Well,
as
Must be a really good job for people who want to stay at that long.
Well, Bob Stock was there from 1960 to 1976.
And I remember him. He was from Goffstown.
Oh, great guy. Wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yeah.
Wonderful guy. I'm telling you. And Ed Kelly was another wonderful guy. And that office has been so good to so many people. And I think that's the thing that brought Dave the victory today. The fact that the office has been receptive. It's done its job. When you have a question, you go there, you get an answer. You got people who are just so intent on making things right for you. Paula and Karen have been there for many, many, many years. It's a great operation. Every operation can use improvement, obviously, because that's the nature of the world. It's the nature of the business. But that operation has run smoothly for a long, long period of time. And it's a credit to the people who headed it. It's a credit to the people who worked there. And I mean that very, very sincerely. That's a great group of public servants.
Well, Melanie wrote a piece in the Union Leader endorsing her reasons for challenging Mr. Scanlon, who was just acting, and now he's not going to be acting. And the one point that gave me some pause that she made some good points, I thought, but the one was the kind of the botched recount in Manchester Ward 6, how a recount he went to the place it did, where he apparently initially announced the official winner was somebody who seemed to tally by 23 votes, came out 1 vote ahead.
Right.
And then they found another stack of ballots that hadn't been counted.
Right.
And I think the right solution was what happened, count them. But, it seems to me like there could have been some criticism of the Secretary of State's office and the way they handled that, and why wasn't that picked up earlier between the tape
Well,
on
I
the
think
machine?
Melanie made a good point, and I think Donna Susie made that same point on the floor of the Senate.
She did.
When she on the floor of the House, when she was supporting Melanie. Melanie was a good senator. She was a good rep, fine lady, and her work on the committees, the committees dealing with elections have been very good and I think very pronounced. That particular situation in Manchester, remember that the Democratic leader did call for an injunction in that situation that was denied, and they went back and did a recount of a recount. That was an item that was brought up by Melanie and brought up, I think, during the presentation by more than one of her supporters.
Right. I think it certainly is a fair criticism. I think what this new Secretary of State, Dave Scanlon, had to deal with essentially was, one, a record turnout in a midterm election. I mean, even far greater than he thought it would be. Then a record number of recounts after that election, more than 30. And meanwhile, a couple of new election laws, that the legislature passed, that put more demands on local election officials.
Oh, yes, it did.
And so that first day of the recount, having talked with David about this before and after, he could see that these new data points, as he called them, that local election officials had to keep track of, were complicating the recount and making it harder to do them fully and completely. And that first night, when that Manchester Ward 6 election winner was announced, just going back through all the sheets after he'd made the announcement, he began to wonder, well, where are the votes? In other words, one thing that, this is kind of in the weeds, but it's worth pointing out, there is no rule in conducting a recount when you announce the result to actually announce the ballots cast. Okay? So if there was a requirement in that rule, and you had said, here are the number of ballots cast and who has won and who has lost, you would have seen with those numbers, right, Lou,
Yes.
that essentially you're missing some ballots.
Right.
That some ballots weren't counted in that initial recount. And really what appears to have happened, the ballots were counted, but they're all stacked in 25 piles. For people who've worked in recounts before, they're well aware of this. You count all the votes and you stack them in 25.
Right.
And then you count the stacks of 25. And what appears to have happened is you then put marks on the tally sheet as you're counting the recount. And those marks include the number of stacks for each candidate. And what appears to have happened was they got one less mark for the Republican candidate of 25 ballots. Right. And so the following day, David Scanlon ordered a random recount in Ward 6 of the governor's race because the state law already required 10 random recounts of state rep races of other offices to make sure state representative elections were accurate. He asked for the recount of Ward 6 in the governor's race. What do you know? The number of ballots cast? More than 25 than in the state rep race. And at that point, you realized, okay, there's an issue here, and we got to continue the recount. And they ended up having to go to the court. Superior Court judge ruled, yes, you can continue to do that. That's sort of what triggered Melody's candidacy, and you can understand why. The Democrats were really bitter that they had lost a seat they thought they were going to have. And with the tie vote, at the end of the day, right, if you add Rochester and then this seat, right, all of a sudden it's 200-200.
Right.
Imagine
that.
So that's why.
Imagine we're talking about that situation. Right. It's not that far off.
That's why there was so much stress and partisan Democrats very upset.
Sure.
That this happened.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It was mentioned.
But clearly, I mean, this was a decisive win for David Scanlon. I mean, with Lou putting his name in the nomination, State Representative Peter Leishman, Democrat from Peterborough, longtime member of the House Finance Committee, seconding the nomination. He got at least 24 Democrats supporting him, which I think for him is very important because at the end of the day, this Secretary of State is going to have a whale of a battle on their hands, keeping the New Hampshire first in the nation primary.
Absolutely.
And it's going to require Democrats to work with him as much, if not more, than Republicans. Right. Since after all, who's the fight with? Right. It's not with Republicans nationally, is it?
Exactly.
It's with Democrats.
Right.
So this Secretary of State, David Scanlon, needs Democratic leaders all over the state and those who are working in Washington rowing all together to keep this primary first.
Well, after all, this is the one issue in which there's total bipartisan agreement, isn't it? The status of the New Hampshire primary.
Right.
Democrats and Republicans can fight about cats and dogs about everything else, but when it comes to the New Hampshire primary, it's a united front and always has been.
Right.
So I want to get you to talk a little bit about that too, Kevin. You've watched this primary. You've been a key part of reporting on it for many, many election cycles. And we've had threats to the New Hampshire primary before, but it seems to me maybe this is the most serious threat we've ever had to the New Hampshire primary continuing. And yet we still have the state law, which I'm sure David Scanlon, administered just as well as Bill Gardner did, that exists, and we're not gonna do away with that state law. But do you think the Democrats, under this proposal, which I have no doubt that the National Committee will adopt, can cause enough pain to the Democrats that want to campaign in New Hampshire so that they won't, and we won't actually have the first primary? What do you think the situation's like? How do you think this is going to work out?
I think it remains to be seen, really, because I think at the end of the day, this doesn't have a whole lot of impact in 2024 if Joe Biden announces he's running for re-election and doesn't have a serious challenger.
Right.
Then there really is no Democratic presidential primary, is there?
Right.
In New Hampshire or any of the major states, right?
Right.
So, and this calendar then therefore takes on a whole lot less importance.
Exactly.
Meaning a number of these Democratic leaders in these other states who are, by the way, going to have to move heaven and earth in many cases to move their own primaries up. In many cases, for example, in South Carolina, they set the primary together, Republicans and Democrats. It shall be on the same day, according to the state law in South Carolina right now. And right now, the Republicans are respecting the New Hampshire presidential primary in 2024. So that's just one example of where if Joe Biden says I'm running again and nobody prominent steps forward and says, well, I'm challenging him, then a lot of these states got to ask themselves the question.
Right.
Democratic leaders all over the country is basically, why are we having this fight? And why am I exerting all this political capital for an election that isn't occurring? Meaning, why don't I just suspend the whole thing, and then the month after Joe Biden wins a second term in January of 2025, we can bring this whole schedule back. We can pass all these laws, since obviously in 2028 it's going to be an open seat and a wide open presidential primary process.
Yeah.
How true.
Yeah.
And, well, I think the thing that became evident, though, was that Joe Biden does not favor the New Hampshire primary. That's very clear.
Well, and I think as well, what's also clear, Lou, is that this president is very concerned about a challenge from the far left in the nomination if he runs for a second term.
Yeah.
And so if you're very concerned about that, then you better construct a primary calendar that is to your liking, not to anybody else's. So that's why it starts with South Carolina, which absolutely, let's call a spade here, literally pulled this guy off the mat and delivered him the nomination.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, after finishing fifth here without a win in South Carolina, he could have easily lost the nomination.
Yep, very easily.
Pete Buttigieg, to Amy Klobuchar, to who knows who.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But the Democrats in South Carolina not only gave him a victory, but a resounding victory there. So that's why he looks at the calendar and says, yeah, I want to start there. Even though, by the way, let's talk about South Carolina. My memory serves me correctly. In the last 80 years, only 2 Democrats have won South Carolina for president. And they're not Bill Clinton, they're not Barack Obama, they're not Joe Biden. The only 2 are Jack Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. Narrowly, Jimmy Carter beating Gerald Ford, if you recall.
I had forgotten, but I'm sure you're right.
Jimmy Carter, the Georgia governor, the neighboring governor of South Carolina, and he barely won that state when he beat Gerald Ford. So that's why I also see a lot of states, a lot of Democrats in big national states and other states who've spent years promoting early dates on their own, essentially looking at this calendar and saying, why South Carolina? I mean, and as your good friend Donna Soucy pointed out after the calendar came out, now wait a minute. South Carolina, early states, we're rewarding early state rewards now to 3 states that really don't have a history, not only of going first, but some of them don't even have a history of going in the top 10. South Carolina, Georgia, Michigan. What do they all have in common? They're right-to-work states.
Right.
And New Hampshire is not.
That's correct.
Right? Which has rejected right-to-work. And after all, this President Joe Biden would not be president but for organized labor.
No question.
No question about it.
None whatsoever.
So what are we doing stacking all these states that don't stand for the working man at the top of the primary calendar process?
Yeah. I think it's a query that's unanswerable. I mean, from a logical standpoint, there's no logic. There's no real logic in doing this. The only thing I can see is a disdain because he just didn't like what happened in New Hampshire. And when you finish 5th, that's an embarrassment. That's a real embarrassment.
Yeah, for a former vice president.
And for the 3rd time, Lou, right? He ran for president 3 times. He's never finished better than 5th.
Right.
That was his bit. Yeah. He finished 5th one other time as well, but he's never done well. Yeah. And it hasn't been for lack of effort by him. No. He's put the time in.
He's put the time in.
But it just hasn't happened for him.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. It comes from personal experience.
I think there's no question.
To make a change.
There is a book out about Biden. The title escapes my mind, but Joe Biden's thin-skinned. No question. Absolutely no question. And this is one of the things that really irritates him. really irritates.
What do you mean, coming in fifth in New Hampshire?
Coming in fifth in New Hampshire.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I didn't feel his campaign was really had a lot of energy when he was here.
I thought the campaign was awful. And
I mean, it just didn't have much energy.
and
He
I-
got in rather late. He had you as a backer, but
we
not
worked
enough.
hard.
Not enough.
No, we worked hard
He
for
needed a lot
him.
more Lou D'Alessandros than he had.
His organization here was awful, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do
people
think
work hard, but-
one of the other great ponderables to me is, I wonder whether they put this whole plan together before the midterm, which is to say this: did National Democrats, because they did, expect Biden was going to take a shellacking
Right.
in the midterm, right?
Everybody thought so.
That they were going to, that they could lose the Senate, that they were going to lose the House real bad,
Right.
not just by 5 seats, real bad. And then, so you construct this calendar, you know what I mean? In other words, you know you're going to get a serious challenge from someone from the
Right,
left,
yeah.
and you're going to have difficulty winning.
Right.
So you construct this kind of over the top, let's wire the nomination for me. And you have the midterm election, and everything's roses.
Right.
And Biden not only looks like he's going to run again, but I seriously doubt there's going to be anybody really significant to
things
take him on. He'll get a challenge.
Things are going very well for Mr. Biden right now, I think.
You know,
Right,
so
absolutely.
that's all the more reason why do you rip this all up now and create all this chaos and carnage and stress in all of these early states, not just New Hampshire, in all of
Right.
these early states, when you really might not even have a contest. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Well, Kevin, we're just about at the end, and I have to say, Kevin, how long have you been covering politics in New Hampshire?
40 years.
Wow.
40 years, wow.
40 years.
You and Bill Gardner. Well, Bill's got you by a few years,
Right,
but
right.
in
But-
his
but,
job. But I tell you, it's just inspiring. The wealth of knowledge you present, nobody else has, and you still have the passion for what you're doing. It's obvious, you know. You apparently really like this being the repository of all this political wisdom and excellent insight. So I just have to say, we were so glad that you could make it on our Skype.
Yeah,
I think
thank
it
you.
worked
Thank you,
very
Kevin.
well,
Yeah.
and we'll hope to have you back soon. I mean, you really are a
Oh, thanks so
very,
much.
very
Again,
valuable
I can't
asset to
leave-
us.
I can't leave, though, without paying homage to my late colleague, John DeStacy.
Yes.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. John,
at WMUR, who is one of the greatest defenders of the New Hampshire presidential primary
Yes, he was.
ever had.
right.
You know,
Yeah.
and so when all of this was happening last week, I couldn't get John out of my mind, because what would he be thinking about
Right.
this,
Yeah.
and how he would absolutely be going out of his tree.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
The DNC was trying to take down
Yeah.
first in the nation.
I remember him very fondly.
He's sorely missed.
Yeah.
He
For
covered the
sure.
defamation case I had against the union leader when William Loeb was running it, and I grew to really respect him. He called it. He didn't bias the coverage at all.
John
No,
was a
absolutely.
terrific human being,
Really was.
terrific guy.
Yeah.
Got those two boys who went to Goffstown High School, baseball players, and then on to UNH. John was a really terrific guy, terrific reporter, always there and always searching for the truth in the news. So
There's nothing so powerful as truth, they say.
Nothing so powerful as the truth. That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, let's lay a bet on that one.
Well, folks, that's our hour has sprung to an end. It went by real fast with our wonderful guest, Kevin, and thank you again for joining us. And I'll be back next week with Mike Farley, and we'll put on the post what the show is going to be about. Follow our posts on Facebook. We're putting up better posts on our shows. And as I mentioned, check us on well, I guess it's on Instagram, whatever that is, but also on YouTube. Take care, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Happy New
Christmas.